The state of Florida unveiled its new history guidelines last week, and one part in particular drew the ire of Vice President Kamala Harris. In a speech in Jacksonville, she said that the middle school curriculum teaches that enslaved people benefited from slavery. Now, that didn't sit well with the Republicans, who pointed out that what the language actually says is slaves developed skills which in some instances could be used for their personal benefit. Obviously, completely different. The language in the history standards includes the qualifier in some instances and makes it clear that it's the skills they benefited from, not the slavery itself. Because, of course, you don't benefit from slavery, but learn a skill like, I don't know, cotton picking, and the world is your oyster. You know, some skills that slaves couldn't learn: reading and writing, which is a shame because those are skills from which they might have personally benefited the most. But those damn slave revolts, you let a slave learn to read and they might get ideas. Now, according to the critics quoted by Fox, there's no way you could look at the standards teaching the history of slavery and think that Florida is trying to minimize or whitewash that history. So I looked at the standards myself. Fox News actually linked to the primary source, and I know it surprised me too, a sourced article. Weird. I'm not a history teacher, but I think the critics are kind of right. The standards seem to offer a broad overview of slavery with a great deal of relevant detail and nuance, much more than I remember from middle school. But that only makes the benchmark referenced by the vice president even more incongruous and I think more suspect. Benchmark clarification. Instruction includes how slaves develop skills, which in some cases could be applied for their personal benefit. You may think I'm being deliberately obtuse, but I honestly can't come up with what piece of historically relevant information is going to be conveyed to a middle schooler because of this particular requirement. On the other hand, I can easily see how it could be used to provide cover for a slavery apologetic. It's hard, in fact, for me to imagine a different motivation. I mean, what are we talking about here? Skills they learned in carpentry could allow them to patch the leaky roofs of their slave shacks, or skills learned sewing the master's clothes would allow them to reattach a button to the rags they wore. I mean, when you are property, all of your skills benefit someone else. And no matter how good the rest of the curriculum is, this particular standard is suspicious. And the fact that it was added as a requirement of Florida's Stop Woke Act, I think, confirms that it exists specifically to provide cover for a latter-day lost cause mythology. And Governor Ron DeSantis attacked Harris's comments, accusing her of lying about Florida's education standards, and he called it the Harris-Biden administration, which I think is unintentionally hilarious. But I have to congratulate the governor on one thing. The entire time he was attacking the president for pointing out the dog whistle in Florida's history standards, he never once uttered that word that you know absolutely was rattling around in his head as he spoke. He never once called Kamala Harris uppity. I guess the governor saves his racist dog whistles for basketball players. I'm Kevin, and these are my sinister thoughts.